Hi everyone. In this optional video, I'm going to show some examples of using functions and applying them to solve problems. I won't be teaching anything new in this video. I might mention some small stuff, but for the most part, there'll be nothing new in this video. I'll just be applying concepts we've already seen in lecture, but I'll be trying practice problems that I've never seen before. And you can follow along with me and try to solve them. Pause the video once I read a problem, try to solve it for yourself, and then hit play and see how I approach the problem. And hopefully this helps get you more comfortable with how to use functions. So we'll be working on Replit today, and I have my Replit pulled up here. I've printed hello world. Let me do hello Alex. And if I come over here and I do python3 main.py, we see hello Alex gets printed. So everything's working. So I've just Googled Python practice problems and Python functions practice problems. And I'm pulling up a couple of these. And there's 10 questions here. We'll do some of those. I haven't seen this yet. Let's see. Write a function called product that sums. Yep. So we can do these. These are great as well. And over here. Okay. Let's start with some of these practice problems. So exercise 1. Exercise 1 here is write a program to create a function that takes 2 arguments, name and age, and print their value. Okay. First of all, when I look at that, I think, oh, that's a little confusing. Print their value. So it just wants us to print them to the screen. Okay. Pause the video and see if you can solve this on your own. And then unpause and see how I go about solving it. Okay, you're back. Hopefully you solved it. Take a look at how I'll approach this. So we will be creating a function. So whenever you see create a function, that should tell you def. Think def. Def stands for define. That's the keyword we use to define a function that we can then call. And then we need a function name, which this prompt doesn't specify what to call it, but maybe honestly introduce would be a good name here, because when you're describing someone's name and age, you're kind of introducing them. And it says it should take 2 arguments, name and age. This should say maybe 2 parameters. Should have 2 parameters. So let's just call them name and age. And notice the colon at the end. So we always have our colon, don't forget that. And now we are in the body of the function. I'm going to write pass here for now. What does pass do? I've mentioned this before. I'll remind you here, pass does nothing. It's a placeholder. And so we put pass here when we're still working on our code. We just have to have something. Otherwise, Python will be unhappy if there's nothing here. There will be an error if we try running this. It'll say unexpected end of file while parsing, because after a colon, Python expects some indented statements. And so it'll be very confused if it doesn't find an indent after a colon. So that's why when we don't have anything else, we can put pass. But as soon as you're ready to write more code, get rid of pass and put your code here. There's no need to keep pass around. So what does the body of our function need to do? The body of our function needs to print the value of these variables. That's pretty straightforward. We know how to print the name and we know how to print the age. And why don't we just try calling this? So introduce Sam, who is 25. Introduce Steven, who is 19. We run our code. We see Sam 25, Steven 19. It'd be nice if it printed on the same line. So why don't we do that? We'll do name, then is, the string is, and then age. We'll get rid of the second print. So now if we run our code, it says Sam is 25, Steven is 19. Now I want you to take a look at what I just did and notice a takeaway that I want you to have here. You had to introduce multiple people, and you decided to write a function to do that. By writing the function, if in the future you want to change the way that you introduce people, you only have to change it in one place. You don't have to go through to each of the places where you're going to print, okay, Sam is 25. Okay, print Stephen is 19. Print Sarah is 23. You don't have to do that. You don't have to change code in multiple places. You change it just in one place because you have this nice level of indirection. That's a phrase that you'll hear come up much later on in your CS education. Levels of indirection, layers of indirection. And it refers to this idea of if you can wrap some code and then like kind of call that code, whoever calls the code doesn't need to know how, like, what the body of the code does. All that a user of this code knows is this is a function called introduce that introduces these people. It doesn't need to know how that introduction happens. And so if you want to change how it happens, you can change it without having to change all the different places where an introduction is being kind of requested or called. So that's our first problem. Let's go back and see the next problem. So let's do this one here. Exercise 4. Create a function with a default argument. So write a program to create a function show employee using the following conditions. I'll comment this out. So the first condition is it should accept the employee's name and salary and display both. And if the salary is missing in the function, call the assign default. If the salary is missing in the function call, then assign default value 9,000 to salary. Well, let's start from the beginning. So we're writing a function called show employee. So def stands for define. That's what we always start defining a function with. Show employee pass. So this is just a function. All I did was read this. Create a function show employee. Now, this function should accept the employee's name and salary. So let's do that. Name and salary. So these are the two parameters for our function, which means you can pass in two arguments that presumably are the name and someone's salary. And it says we want to display both. So we just did that in the last problem. We did name. So let's do the same thing. So name has salary. And then salary, like that. That looks pretty good. Why don't we try calling this? So we'll call show employee. Jalen and a salary of 10,000. Show employee Jared has a salary of 5,000. Employee Fred has a salary of 8,500. So now when we run this code, we do see Jalen has salary 10,000, Jared has salary 5,000, Fred has salary 8,500. But the second condition here is that if the salary is missing in the function call, then assign the default value 9,000 to salary. Okay, so the way we do that is in the function definition, where we list out the names of our parameters, for the parameters at the end, we can give a default value. Salary equals 9,000 by default. So now, if I run my code, first of all, I made the default salary 9,000. What's going to happen when I run my code? Let's find out. So nothing changes because for each of these cases, I provided my own value for salary. And if you want to be really clear about what's going on, you can write salary equals. That is a nice reminder. You don't have to. Your code will still work, but this is a nice reminder that this salary variable has a default value if you don't write, and that if you don't provide this, it'll use the default. So I'll run this again. Yep. 10,000, 5,000, 8,500. But now notice if I remove one of these and I don't provide a second argument to the show employee function, then salary will get filled in with the default value, 9,000. Now it says Jalen has salary 9,000. In fact, we can do that for all of these people here. Jalen, Jared, and Fred are now going to be paid equally. The default salary of 9,000. You might be wondering, I mentioned this has to go at the end. You can have multiple default parameters. For example, you could have, let's see, name, salary, I don't know, years of service. Maybe by default we'll say it's 0. Name, salary, with years of service. Years of service equal to service. So now if we run this, it says 9,000 with years of service equal to 0 because the default for all of them is 0. And here you can specify either the salary or the years of service or both. So years of service equals 5. And if you run this code, it'll now override whatever thing that you give a default, a overriding value for. And this is why I say it's always better to specify with this variable name equals in the case that it has a default value, because by default, if you don't specify which one you're overriding, it'll just override them in order that they were defined. So with 2 arguments, it'll fill in the values of the first 2 parameters. So here, just Jalen 5 will make the salary 5 because in the definition, so here, see the salary is 5. In the definition, you can see that name is the first parameter, salary is the second. But here, if you want to leave salary as the default and just override years of service, you would specify, actually, you want to override years of service. So that is the thing that Python should override. And then years of service will be correctly set to 5, and the salary is by default 9,000. Okay, we've got our code written now. This is great. We've solved our second problem. Now notice, by the way, notice that I'm deleting my function calls. Why is that? That's because the problem specifies it asks us to write a function, but it doesn't ask us to call that function. The only reason I'm calling that function is just to test it out and show you what it does. And so you should be doing the same thing. When you go to submit your code, when it says write a function, unless it explicitly says also call that function, you shouldn't be calling the function. You should only be writing the function or defining the function. Okay, going on, create an inner function. Okay, we won't be doing this right now. Let's skip those 2 there. So I like these problems here. Write a function called product that accepts 2 parameters and returns the product of the 2 parameters numbers. So we've got, write a function called product. Okay. Def product that accepts 2 parameters. Doesn't say what to name them. They're up to you. I'll call them num1 and num2. You could call them A and B. You could call them X and Y. You could call them dog and cat if you wanted, but you want to pick names that are clear. And num1 and num2 is easy for me to keep track of because I understand that they're both numbers. And it returns the product of the 2 parameters numbers. Okay. Now I've noticed some people that they'll first do product, okay, mul equals num1 times num2, and then they do return mul. This is perfectly fine. You can do that. And now if we go down here, let me give you a little quiz as you're following along. Tell me what will happen. What will we see in the terminal if I call product 5, 5? So pause the video, think about it. If I run Python 3 main.py right now, when I hit enter in 5 seconds, what will get printed to the terminal? 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's see if you're right. What? Let me run it again. Nothing gets printed to the terminal. But I thought our function is multiplying num1 and num2 and then returning it. So yes, you're right. It is multiplying and returning it. But we don't use that return value for anything. So as a reminder, what is a return value? The return value is what the function call evaluates to. So a function call is an expression, just like 3 plus 4, just like 9 mod 4, just like any expression that we've seen, just like a greater than b, that's an expression that evaluates to a Boolean. A function call is an expression that evaluates to whatever the function returns, whatever its return statement returns, gives back. And so this actually evaluates to whatever the product is, 25. So you can think of it as just being replaced by 25. But we don't do anything with that 25. So you have to either assign it to a variable, like result equals product 5, or you have to pass it into some other function to use. For example, you could do print product 5, 5, and then this product 5, 5 is an expression that'll get evaluated, and in this case evaluated to the value 25, and then that will be passed in as an argument to the print function, which will print it out to the screen. So let's run our code and see what happens. main.py. Perfect. 25 gets printed. Before we go on, I want to improve this function even more because there's something else I don't like here. Look at this. So we create a new variable mul, and we assign it the value num1 times num2, and then we promptly return mul. Whenever you see something like this, whenever you create a variable and then immediately return it, you should be a little suspicious unless you have some particular reason for doing that, which sometimes you do. Sometimes you do, but for most cases, there's no reason to create a new variable here. Why? Because num1 and times num2 is an expression that gets evaluated. It then gets stored in the variable mul, and then we reference the variable mul and get its value and return that. So why even have this variable at all? You can return an expression. And I should be really clear here. You're not returning the expression. When Python sees this, it sees, okay, this is a return statement, and this is the thing I'm going to return. Ah, well, this is an expression that Python will first simplify and evaluate, and then it'll return whatever value that's evaluates to. So it'll go, okay, num1 times num2 is 25, and then I'm going to return 25. So you can see here, if I run this code again, this will work. We print 25 to the screen. Let's go on to the next function. So next function that we're going to be writing is a function called return day. Oh, before I read any further, let me just set up the most basic thing. Def return day pass. So now I have the body of I have a function definition that takes no arguments yet, no parameters, and it doesn't do anything yet. Let's figure out what we're supposed to do. So this function takes in one parameter, a number from 1 to 7, and then returns the day of the week. 1 is Sunday, 2 is Monday, etc. If the number is less than 1 or greater than 7, the function should return none. Okay, I think we can do this. So we know that we're going to have to take one parameter, one argument. So let's say we'll call it day num. So it's the number of the day. And we also know here that if the number is less than 1 or greater than 7, the function should return none. So that's handy to know. So if day num is less than 1 or day num is greater than 7, we return none. And remember, none is kind of this default type that's used specifically when there's no value. In fact, well, I'll show you this in a minute. Let's solve the rest of the problem. So we now know if the number is too big or too small, we return none. Now, this function takes in one parameter. and returns the day of the week. One way that we could do this is we could have a whole bunch of statements here. So elif day num is equal to 1. We'll return Monday. And why don't we just repeat this a bunch of times? So 2, 3, 3, 4. So 1 is Monday, 2 is Tuesday, 3 is Wednesday, 4 is Thursday. Oh, the problem did say 1 is Sunday. I don't count Sunday as the first day, but I'll do it because they said so. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Finally, day 7 is Saturday. And actually, you might notice maybe there's a better way of structuring this. We don't really need this elif at the end. We could just have an else. And think about why that is. That's because every other case, like we know, so from here on, from this case, day num, we know that if this case doesn't match, then that means that day num must have been between 1 and 7, right? Because if day num were less than 1 or greater than 7, we would have just returned none immediately. So now the only possible values are 1 through 7. So here the number is 1. If that doesn't match, we check if it's 2, so on and so forth. Finally, we check if it's 6. If the number is not less than 1, it's not greater than 7, and it's not 1 through 6, then we know that the number must be 7. So that's why we can use an else here. And why don't we try running this? So again, tell me what's going to happen when I do return day 3. What will that print to the screen? What will we see on our screen? Pause the video, think about it, and now 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Huh? Nothing happens. Why does nothing happen? The same trick as last time. Notice we are returning the day of the week. We aren't printing the day of the week. So that means that this function call evaluates to the string Tuesday. But we're not doing anything with that string. We're neither saving it to a variable, nor are we printing it. We are just calling this function return day and doing nothing with the result. So we have to take that return value and we have to print it out if we want to see it on the screen. So great, we get Tuesday. Let's see, if we do 1, we should get Sunday according to the problem. Whoops. There we go. Just didn't save. Sunday. And now if I do something like, what about day 9? What is day 9 of the week? Well, this returns none. Now I'll show you 2 shortcuts here. One is the fact that none signifies nothing. So actually, you can just do return. And this return, when you have just a return statement, it assumes that the thing that you're returning is just none. So whenever you want to return none, you can just put return. And that still works. See, it still prints none. Even though you're not explicitly saying return none, Python fills that in for you. The second thing is, this seems kind of ugly. This seems like a lot of conditionals. How else do we know how to map a value? How else do we know how to map an integer to a value? If you're caught up on your lectures, you might be thinking this seems a lot like a good chance to use a list. And I would agree with you. So now why don't we create a list of the days of the week? So the first thing in our list will be Sunday. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whoops, Friday, Saturday. All right, so that's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now, instead of having all of these conditionals, we could just return days of week day num, right? Because here the first day is Sunday, the second day is Monday, Yeah, why don't we run this? Let's see what happens. So day 2. Day 2 is Monday. Clear. Why does it print Tuesday? See if you can spot my error here. Why is it printing Tuesday? Why is day 2 Tuesday? Clearly day 2 here is Monday. Pause the video, take a look, see if you can find my bug. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You might remember that indexing into an array starts from 0, not from 1. So that means that if we want to get the second day, we need to do daynum minus 1. And this should make sense because day 7, if we're indexing 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, there is no 7th element. So day 7 should be index 6, so on and so forth. So if we run our code, we get Monday. And the way that we make sure that we're not doing an index out of bounds, so we don't do anything negative to get funky wrapping around, and we don't have any index out of bounds issues, is because we have this case here that checks if the number is too small or too big, we return. So we know that by the time, and remember, return finishes the function completely. Like you might be wondering, hey, why don't we need an else here? You could have an else, and that's totally valid, but logically you don't need one because if the previous condition is true, then we return, and so the function just ends. So this, like line 28 will never execute if the condition in line 26 is true. Pi Monday. Let's try it again with, I don't know, 6. This will be Friday, and finally, so let's make sure 7 works. That's a nice edge case. Saturday. Finally, if we do 8, we would expect that none gets printed. Oops, this hasn't saved yet. So 8. Clear. My bad. There we go. We see none gets printed. Perfect. One last problem for this video. Let's see what the last one here is. Okay, last element. I'm not going to do that one right now. This one's not bad. I like this one. So for this problem, we have to write a function called number compare. It takes in 2 parameters. It says they're both numbers. So let's do that. Def number compare. And notice they're doing this camel case, and I don't like that. It should definitely be snake case. So number compare, and it takes in num1, num2. Now, if the first parameter is greater than the second, so if num1 is greater than num2, then our function should return first is greater. Why don't we do that? Okay, if the second parameter is greater than the first, this function returns second is greater. So if, oops, and num2 is greater than num1, turn second is greater. And I want to point out, I'm starting to make a mistake here, and I want you to catch it. It's not really a mistake, but it's just not clean. Really, all of these conditions are connected, right? So it's like if num1 is greater than num2, do something. Otherwise, if num2 is greater than num1, do something. And finally, else, the function returns numbers are equal. So else, by default, return numbers are equal. Return numbers are equal. And if you were following closely, you might be thinking to yourself, do you even need this else? And you'd be right. You don't actually need the else, because if you enter the first case, the function would end here. If you enter the second case, the function would end with this return. So if you didn't have the else, the only way that you would make it to line 40 is if neither of these cases matched. Because if either of them did, the function would be over. It wouldn't execute the last line because the whole function would end. Even though the conditional flow would allow it, because this line is no longer part of the conditional, because there's a return statement earlier on, that ends the execution of the function. But to have a nice clean conditional here with kind of 3 options, I'll have an if, elif, else. Let's call our function and see if it does what we think it does. We'll do number compare 12, 5. And then number compare 9, 9. Finally, number compare 0, 3. I made the same mistake I've been pointing out to you guys over and over. My function returns something. It doesn't print. So if I want to print out the value that it returns, I have to print. I have to pass the return value into a print function or assign it to a variable and use it for something. Okay, so first is greater. Yes, 12 is greater than 5. Then numbers are equal. Second is greater. Awesome. Our code works. Our code works. The last thing I'll show you today is modules. And how do we do modules? So modules, we can either import built-in modules into Python that you don't have to have a file for. They kind of exist in secret under the hood in Python, like random. So you can do import random, or you can do import math. But if you want to create import some of your own functions, so let's create a new file here, functions caller.py. What you do is you find the name of the file that has your functions, which is main.py, and you do import just the name of the file without the .py. So import main. And now in the body of your function, in the file that you just did the import in, you can now call any of the functions by putting the file's name without .py, so main, then a dot, and then the name of your function. So we can call name.introduce Alex 50, a 50-year-old Alex. And we can also do main dot return day. So return day 1, favorite day equals main dot return day 1. Print my favorite day is fav day. So now when I run this, whoops. I need to open up my functions caller here just to show you so you can look and see. Clear Python 3 functions caller.py. It imports main. So now you can use all the functions defined in main. And it does that, by the way, by running each of the lines of code in that function. And so if you have lines of code that don't define a function, they'll get executed too. And that's what might throw off your autograder. If you accidentally leave lines that call your function or print something in addition to just the function, so if you add function calls, that will throw off the autograder because the autograder imports your file, and then those lines will get run, and it'll produce output that the autograder isn't expecting. So that's why you want to make sure, unless the problem tells you specifically to call your function, then just define the function. Don't call it in that same file. If you want to call it, make a new file, import that module that you just created, the file that you created, and call it from here to test it. Yeah, main.introduce fav day, or test it in the file that you're writing, but make sure to delete the call before submitting. So this works perfectly. Main.introduce, main.return day. Hopefully this video helped you better understand functions. In the next video, optional video, that'll come out probably in a few days, I'll do the same kind of thing, but for lists, talking about how to use lists. See you in class next week. Bye.